4 years ago, I decided to make the change of my life and move back to Vietnam. And my life really started there.
5 years ago when I decided to come, people thought I was crazy. Now I see every year more and more people wanting to come back to Vietnam. And the question is why?
One of the stories of Vietnam as it has opened up over the past 20 years has been the return of people from a diaspora scattered by the war and the tough years that followed. And these days, it's not just the so-called war babies who are returning to their roots, but a younger generation drawn by a growth story in a country that remains politically autocratic, but wants to become a magnet for investment in Southeast Asia.
Social media has helped to demystify the realities of doing business in Vietnam. For example, before I came back, I was told that you would be prevented by the government and all sorts of things. But the reality is, once the government knows that you're here to do business and not politics, they leave you alone.
Siang Van Tran lived in the UK for 30 years after escaping Vietnam by boat via a refugee camp in Malaysia. He has set up and sold businesses in e-learning and e-commerce in the UK, and then moved into providing web services for large companies, a business that brought him back to Vietnam.
I started by helping people from my village develop a skill set that would allow them to do other things other than be a fisherman. So I taught them digital skills, and they were helping my agency in the UK. Eventually I decided to expand that and move back to Vietnam and develop a full-fledged team here.
Quang Anh Nguyen had a very different experience. Her parents moved from Vietnam to East Germany during the last days of communist rule there.
We lived in a very small town. My parents did everything from selling cigarettes to restaurants to selling Chinese noodles for 10 years. Well, it's quite ironic because the generation of the war baby, like my parents or my friends' parents, they escaped Vietnam. Most of them ran away from communism, or in my case of my parents, they escaped for a better life. Now the generation afterwards, which mostly was born abroad, wants to come back.
KD has a contrasting tale to tell. She is the host of the wildly popular expatriate-made variety show Paris by Night. Her father was a fighter pilot and a former Prime Minister of US-backed South Vietnam, which was defeated by the Communist North in 1975. But even with her family history, she says she has been made welcome on her return.
Living abroad, of course, I was kind of apprehensive. I don't know what I expect here because of my background and my father, but I was so surprised when I came back here to feel that I was so welcome.
Dao Chi-ang spent her childhood split between various countries in Europe and Asia. After an early part of her career working for a Japanese multinational, Chi-ang now runs a cafe and food business in Hanoi.
I always seek for an answer in my purpose of being overseas. I knew that it was because of my family, but after my parents moved back to Vietnam and I was alone overseas, I started wondering, why am I still here?
But setting up a business in a frontier economy isn't for the faint-hearted, and the culture clash can be acute.
The culture in the workplace is completely different. It's slower, and their expectation is different from your expectation. Because people here, they grew up having a really tough childhood, and it's all about being a survivor, which is a good skill. But then in terms of business, everyone has their own agenda, so it's always what's in it for me kind of mentality, and how can I make money.
Many will be watching the experiences of those who have come back so far to see what has changed and what has not, 4 decades after the end of Vietnam's foreign-fueled civil war.
Because of what happened in 1975, we have an exodus of millions of people abroad. Now imagine if all of them come back. I think there's a great chance that we will become a great country or great power in the area.
As the 40th anniversary of the fall of Saigon approaches, the story of those scattered by it is still being told. Michael Peel, Financial Times, Hanoi.